Tonight we have a very special guest, David Shoebridge. David is the New South Wales Greens candidate for the upper house in the upcoming federal election. If he is elected, history will be made, as it will be the first time New South Wales has voted in a Greens senator in 2 elections in a row, following Senator Faruqi's re-election in the 2019 federal election. Before entering politics, David honed his speaking and negotiation skills, working as a barrister for 13 years. In 2004, David was elected to Woollahra Municipal Council, being re-elected in 2008. David became a member of the New South Wales Upper House in 2010 and has been re-elected ever since. David, I wish you a very warm welcome to Canterbury-Bankstown Climate Action Group. Please feel free to introduce yourself and deliver acknowledgement of country if you feel to do so.
Oh, thanks, Alex, and thanks everybody for the invitation. It's actually lovely to be here, and it's really nice to be talking to a bunch of people who are doing what we need so many millions of more people around the planet to do, which is actually think about how we save the future. So thanks very much for what you guys do, whether there's a politician here or not. This kind of local action is actually really critical. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As a Greens MP, central to my work in politics is environmental justice and environmental sustainability and social justice. And they, for me, come together in the work we do on Aboriginal justice work. I'm the Aboriginal justice spokesman for the party. And if we're going to genuinely tackle this climate emergency, if we're going to live in some kind of balance with this continent, well, then we need to learn from the wisdom of First Nations peoples who did that for 60,000 years before us, walk together with them, and also deliver truth, treaty and justice. So this is Gadigal land. We're all on unceded First Nations land, and we give that acknowledgement. You asked me to introduce myself a little. Why don't you sort of a nice soft entry, which is what's something I enjoy doing in my spare time. Well, I just love bushwalking and hiking. That is the if I have a gripe about being a politician, and there are plenty of things to gripe about, but there's plenty more things to be amazingly privileged about. But if I have a gripe, it's so bloody hard to get away from multi-day walks and to pack the bag and just head off where there are never any more cars, spend time with family and kids, and spend that time in nature. For me, that is like as close to bliss as you get. You know, when you're like 1.5 Ks away from the track head, you're, at least, that 20 minutes walk away from a road, and then you just sort of lose yourself in nature for a couple of days. For me, that is one of my great loves, and doing that with my partner Patricia and my kids is actually pretty special.
That's lovely. I'm glad you had a great experience doing that. I myself had a very, very horrible experience getting lost in the Blue Mountains on the weekend, but I'm glad you have a great time doing that.
Well, Alex, I would suggest preparation is a key part of it. Telling people where you're heading off is another really good thing to do. And always having the emergency food and a little bit of emergency water, and maybe one of those EPIRB beacons as well, Alex. You can borrow them, from the police up in the mountains before you head off again next time. Oh,
excellent advice. Thank you very much. Now, we mentioned that you're running for the federal election, and we've all followed your career through the media and things like that, and we've seen you've been an excellent state politician. So why, coming up to the federal election, are you deciding to make that switch and run for the federal Senate rather than for the upper house of New South Wales?
Yeah, well, so I'm midway through my second term in the state parliament. I originally came in on a casual vacancy in 2010. Sylvia Hale actually stepped down and gave me a run in the 6 months leading up to what was then the 2011 state election.
So throughout the election, will you be holding onto that position, or do you have to relinquish that position in order to run for the rebel government?
It's a one-way ticket. I won't be coming back to the New South Wales upper house. I'll either be going into the Senate and doing what I can there for us all collectively, or I'll be getting a big chunk of my life back and be doing a few more long-distance hikes.
Excellent. So you're basically putting it all on the line, basically rolling the dice and going all out for the federal election.
Well, and you asked me why I did it.
Why so?
I did it because the window for us to actually get serious change is almost shutting. Like if we don't do it in the next 3 to 6 years, we don't make this next parliament work for the climate and work for the future, the job just gets, degrees and degrees harder. I see it as like some of the most urgent, the most urgent political, the most urgent social, the most urgent economic business we have is to have a parliament that has, I hope, a powerful progressive crossbench in the Senate, which holds the balance of power and actually turns the juggernaut around. We don't have any time to lose. What I'm really excited by is, as Alex, you said, this is our first chance to have 2 Greens senators in New South Wales, because it's a half Senate election. So only half of the Senate is up for the election. Only 6 of the 12 spots for New South Wales is up for election. So Maureen Faruqi, who got elected at the last election, is halfway through her term. So regardless of the results, she will continue through for another 3 years. So this is our chance to double the number of Greens reps in the Senate for New South Wales, go from 1 to 2. And what's really exciting is we have the same opportunity in South Australia and Queensland, where we can double our representation. And if we get it right, and we do that across the country, then we can have the biggest ever third-party bloc in the Senate of 12 Green senators. No third party has had that in the history of federation. And with that comes, I hope, sufficient clout, sufficient political clout linked to big grassroots movements where we can turn this horrible juggernaut around and start taking real action on climate. If I didn't put up my hand now, then when are you willing to sort of risk everything to try and get those kind of systemic changes? We're doing it now.
Excellent. And what would be the top 3 issues the Greens want to focus on in the federal parliament, whether they be 3 issues to do with climate change themselves or whether it's some other things that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, well, as you know, probably the big systemic change is climate change. And with that, there's a whole lot of system change that underpins climate change. We have a policy of getting us towards 100% renewables by 2030. Super achievable, actually. And in fact, in many ways, New South Wales is a good model to follow through there with the blueprint. I'm happy to talk about that later, how we got that in New South Wales. The real reason why we're having trouble achieving that in New South Wales, even though we've got quite good state regulation, is because there's actually direct obstruction at a federal level, continuing public investment in things like opening up the Beetaloo Basin, continuing regulatory assistance for things like the Adani mine and opening up additional coal and gas projects. We actually need the federal government to start lifting its share and work together with state in a cohesive way with state and territory governments around the country. That's how we'll get to 100% renewable by 2030. And of course, we want to get to net zero by 2035. So climate change is front and centre, and we bunch of really practical, connected policies in that place. Keeping coal and gas in the ground, but also we're the only party that has come up with a fully costed policy that will actually provide the job-for-job guarantees for the coal mining workers and coal workers, which means that those coal-dependent communities in, say, the Hunter Valley or in the Bowen Basin in Queensland or parts of the Illawarra, those coal-dependent communities are actually going to have a life and a really positive economic life as we rapidly transition out of coal. That actually costs billions of dollars. But in the scheme of a 10-year transition plan out of coal, it's super affordable at a federal level. So there's package of climate policies, and we think that is urgent. We also have a bunch of policies that I think go hand to hand with that. For example, putting in place a fully empowered federal ICAC with retrospective powers and royal commission. If you really want to disentangle the fossil fuel industry from politics, well, you need to also fight some of the systemic corruption that has produced the outcomes we have at the moment. And so I actually see my 100% commitment, the party's 100% commitment to a national ICAC as going hand in hand with the kind of system change and climate change policies. And then we also have a fundamental commitment to economic fairness. That means putting a 6% wealth tax on billionaires. Australian billionaires got wealthier at a greater rate than billionaires anywhere else on the planet over the last 2.5 years. It's really obscene. I personally think a billionaire is kind of the definition of policy failure when it comes to economic fairness and economic justice. And so a 6% wealth tax on billionaires, together with proper tax on corporations, particularly the 1/3 of multinationals who paid zero tax, multinationals like Netflix or Apple or a Swiss mining conglomerate like Glencore, they've not paid $1 of corporate tax the entire time they've operated in Australia. But, maybe they're doing that because they just love providing products for Australia and they don't care if they lose money. Maybe. Or maybe they're cheating us. They kind of cheating us. And with that kind of economic reform comes the money to do great social justice things, like put dental care into Medicare. I don't know why Medicare stops as your mouth. Last time the Greens were in the balance of power, we extended dental care, Medicare to kids. And in the 10 years since, 3 million kids have had their teeth fixed under that policy. We want to extend Medicare to everybody, and we have a way of paying for it, which is a fair taxation system on corporates and billionaires.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that summary of all the policies. Very exciting, and I wish you and the Greens Party the best of luck for that upcoming election. So, in your time in the New South Wales government, you mentioned that New South Wales government provided a good blueprint to how people could move to 100% renewable energy, and that it was a collaborative approach. Can you give us some insight into how the different parties were either working together or fighting against each other at the New South Wales level in terms of climate policy, and how you can see this equipping you with the skills or the experience needed to operate at a federal level? Because I think we can all agree that at a federal level, all the parties seem to be opposing each other and are basically doing whatever they can do to rip each other's guts out. So, yeah, what are your insights on your experience at working at a state level, and how can that be applied?
Well, can I tell you, one former Canterbury-Bankstown Greens member was a bloke called Jack Mundy. And you may or may not know Jack Mundy, but Jack Mundy headed up the Green Bands movement and was a long-standing member of the party, the Greens Party. He always would say, you're having a chat with him over lunch or you're catching up with him at a political rally, he would always say that if you want to make serious change, you actually have to build an alliance that goes across class, goes across race, goes across gender. You've actually got to reach out to other people in order to make serious change. And a good case in point for Jack's work would be when he worked to save Kelly's Bush on the north side of Sydney. That was a case of, at that time, a communist-led building union and a bunch of building labourers joining together with a bunch of doctors and, very much upper middle class community on the north side of Sydney, building an alliance to save that beautiful Kelly's Bush. And it's a great case of how, if you want to make meaningful change, you've got to be willing to get outside your comfort zone and talk to people and build those kind of alliances. And that's my fundamental belief in politics. So, and a case in point would be the renewable energy roadmap that I still recall having a chat with the then Energy and Environment Minister, Matt Keane, who called me up and said, look, I've got this legislation. It's not public yet, but we want to have a roadmap to put in place a bunch of renewable energy zones and get us on a roadmap to get 100% renewables. I don't know how to get this through the upper house. That place is really toxic. It's full of all sorts of weird stuff. And also, if it gets pulled apart in the upper house, the very careful, finely balanced position that he'd arrived at in the coalition could fracture and be pulled apart. If there was delay, if it was going to get pushed off, he'd managed to get something through the coalition party room, which was pretty good. And if we put a whole lot of pressure on it in the upper house, it was likely to fall apart in front of us. And he was pretty blunt about it. I mean, thankfully, his policy of renewable energy zones was pretty much exactly what the Greens had taken to the state election. We had a policy of 5 renewable energy zones across the state. We wanted it all to be publicly owned and publicly built. He wasn't going to come at that. He wanted it all to be privately owned but publicly regulated. So anyhow, I met with him. We went through the basic policy position he had, and I said, well, look, it's not our policy, but it's as bloody close as we're likely to get. We want to talk to you about empowering First Nations peoples and economic empowerment for First Nations peoples. At the time, I think he had 3 renewable energy zones. And I said, well, we'll almost certainly be talking to you about expanding that to some of the big industrial workforces that should be a part of this in the Illawarra and in Hunter.
Excellent. I do remember Illawarra and Hunter were not originally included in that plan. So yeah, congratulations.
And we said, and we want to see some seed funding for green hydrogen, genuine green hydrogen as well in this project. And he said, well, look, I think that's kind of achievable. You go away and have a look at this. I'll think about what you want to put on the table, and then we'll work out a pathway through. So I did. I went away and looked at it. It was very, very rapid policy ramping up over 24 to 48 hours. And then I actually went and spoke to the Animal Justice Party as well, who are pretty good on this stuff. And I said, look, we think this is pretty good. We think we can make it slightly better. But if between the Greens and the Animal Justice Party, if we go to the coalition and say, hey, we've got 5 votes for you, then the coalition already has a legislative pathway through the upper house. They've got a majority. It's not a very usual majority, if you think about it, the coalition, the Greens and the Animal Justice Party, but it's a majority. And so I went back to him and said, look, we've got you a majority, provided we have good faith dealing on all of this. I said, you can take that majority and go and see Labor and say to Labor, well, do you want to be inside the tent or outside the tent? Because if you're inside the tent, we can talk about amendments. We can talk about how, making these renewable energy zones right. And we all agreed that it was far better if we could to get all the major players in this space on renewable energy and climate on the same page, because then whatever we get through the parliament is going to stick. It's not going to be turned on its head after the next election. And so to give him credit, he went away and did that and said to Labor, you want inside or outside the tent? Where do you want to be? And Labor, to their credit, said they wanted to be inside the tent. And then between the 3 groupings, we worked together a series of amendments. And then the only player on the outside trying to tear it down ended up being Mark Latham and One Nation. And he had, I think, 300 amendments drafted for him by a coal baron to try and put the pressure on the upper house and the parliament, put enough pressure on, not necessarily to burn the Greens or Labor off, but put enough pressure on for long enough to tear the internal position of the coalition in half. That was his goal. And so literally we worked with Keane very closely in shutting down all of Mark Latham's noxious attacks, parliamentary attacks in the upper house. We had marathon settings and we rammed it through in 3 days, and we finally got there. He didn't get a single amendment up, not one amendment up, and we have the roadmap in place and it's signed on by all the major players. And you might have seen recently the auction went up for the Hunter renewable energy zone, and I think it was oversubscribed by, I can't remember how much, but something like $110 billion of potential investment money was put forward for just that one renewable energy zone. I think that's how you do politics. If we're going to get serious reform, you've got to be willing to go outside your comfort zone and work for the greater good.
Excellent. That's an amazing success story. How do you envision that working in either a Morrison-led government or an Anthony Albanese-led government if you move into the federal election? How do you envision that transferring to the future?
I genuinely don't think it's achievable with a Morrison-led government. That there's got such a bunch of nasty, noxious deadheads in there. There's no Matt Keane there to run that kind of policy. You're dealing with a guy called Angus Taylor. And Angus Taylor is utterly unprincipled scumbag, entirely owned by the fossil fuel industry, because that's how he thinks his political career will be played and benefited. So I genuinely think we have to get rid of the Morrison government.
So you think hard, strong campaigning is extremely important coming up to this next election?
100%. And I also think that a majority Labor government would do nowhere near enough to drive us where we need to go on climate. Nowhere near enough. I mean, they've made absolutely zero commitments that you could take to the bank and save the planet with in the lead up. The only way we're going to get serious reform is if we have a minority Labor government with a progressive crossbench, which actually has political power. Now, I know Albanese says he's not going to deal with the Greens and he's not going to deal with independents and he's just going to be magically Prime Minister without a majority of votes. Well, good luck with that, right? If you want to get legislation through, you need a majority. And you need a majority in both houses. And the political reality will come in pretty bloody brutally early with any minority government. And it's in that position that we would hopefully, as collaboratively as possible and as positively as possible, drive forward some of this reform agenda. Will we get everything we want? Absolutely not. But will we get a hell of a lot more if we are in that balance of power position and able to drive change? Well, then yes. And I've told you how I want to approach this stuff.
Excellent. Well, moving forward, what do you feel is the most effective way ordinary people can make changes in terms of climate action? Now, we've got about 20 or 30 people in this chat at the moment. And I think probably simply saying, vote for me or vote for the Greens is going to be probably, we've got a mix of different parties, but you're probably not going to put you along to the next election just doing that. What can people in this group do to help people running for elections that are promoting climate action, or in their general day-to-day work? We work often with councils and things like that. How can they work in their local community to promote climate action? What do you think are the best ways, and what can we do?
Well, I mean, we can probably break this down in bits if you want, and we can do a bit of Q&A at this point as well. People can throw different questions at me. But look, I'd say vote one Greens is a big step forward, but I don't pretend, even if we had an entire Greens parliament, that all the answer would ever lie in parliament. We actually need super engaged citizens forcing parliaments to take the action. I mean, I've now been in the New South Wales Parliament for 11 and a bit years, and it doesn't get any more attractive the closer you get to it, right? It doesn't. The act of politics and the process of politics just gets even uglier the closer you see it. So parliaments don't of themselves just churn out great ideas and really impressive reforms that take on entrenched power bases. They just don't. As a general rule, parliaments deliver for the status quo, and the status quo at the moment is a hell of a lot of fossil fuels and a hell of a lot of empowered fossil fuel corporations literally buying our politics. That's the status quo. We want that to change. Well, then we need to force that change on parliaments. And we do it through things like the students' climate strike and making it clear to this current generation of politicians that they're going to go extinct pretty soon with a rising surge of youth votes who throw the buggers out. And we do it with your local MPs getting the message loud and clear that if they fail to take action over the next term of parliament, that you're going to judge them on them and you're going to throw the buggers out, and you're going to build a grassroots movement and a citizen-wide revolt to actually throw the buggers out at the next election. You're going to judge them very harshly on it. Now, how do you do that? Well, there's multiple strategies. One is communicate with them. Tell them unambiguously that, that you expect to be getting to net zero by 2035, whatever your local target is, that you expect them to keep coal and gas in the ground, and you expect them to think about our kids and our grandkids. But you also feel free to organise some rallies outside their offices or a local, energy retailer's office, and keep climate visible. I think we need to keep climate visible over the next 50 or 60 days. I think that's a real challenge. We want it visible.
Yeah. Oh. So I was just going to ask you, how do you communicate to your local members in a way that's effective? You just answered that by saying demonstrations, but a lot of people would find that a bit uncomfortable. Do you have any ideas of what actually affects? Say we're in a Labor electorate here. How do you tell them, apart from just trying to call them, or is there anything else that you suggest?
Well, I mean, you can do it nicely too. You can send them an email and say, hi, we are the Canterbury-Bankstown Climate Action Network, and we think it's essential that we meet with you before this upcoming election, because we want to talk to you about what we think are inadequate commitments your party's made to X, Y, and Z. Or you might think they're great, in which case say you want to back them in. But you say we want to meet with you, and it's really urgent because this stuff can't wait, and we want to know what your position is before the election. And say, we'd love to meet with you in the next fortnight. And then if they don't respond, say, well, look, we tried to meet with you, but you wouldn't meet with us. So we're going to be turning up at your office at 9:00 on Tuesday. And we're going to have a bunch of friends, and we're going to bring our letter where we tried to meet with you and see if we can get a meeting with you that way. And you can, those sort of strategies can be really powerful, particularly
door knocking
first, if you've asked first. I also think you've got a lot of train stations, and actually producing some materials, being at train stations in the morning and giving a scorecard on where the different parties stand on climate, and say, if you're thinking about voting climate, here's a scorecard that tells you where they all stand on climate. And remember, there's a lower house and a Senate vote. Like educating people about how they can be politically powerful on climate. Most people, Jackie, don't even understand how preferences work. How, if you vote one Greens or you vote one, maybe a small independent, and you really want to get rid of the coalition, if you vote 1 Greens, 2 Labor, or 1 Independent, 2 Greens, 3 Labor, or whatever you want to do, that if your first preference doesn't get elected, it's not a wasted vote. It goes through at 100% full value, and you can be part of throwing Scott Morrison out as well. And you actually kind of double your vote. You know, you send a message to Labor that they're too weak, and you also get to do what I really want to do on probably Sunday, the 22nd of May, and wake up and talk about former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. You get to do both.
What about for how you're running for, David? So you explained that voting system. If we vote for you and you don't get 50% of the vote, do you not get in, or how do you?
No. The way it works in the Senate is there are 6 spots up for election, and so the quota is about 14%. You need to get about 14% of the vote for a full quota. But by the time you get to the last spot, a lot of preferences have exhausted in the upper house. And so the last spot is not almost always filled by a partial quota. So somewhere between 6 and 8% is normally what is required to get that last spot elected. And that's what we're going for in the Senate for the Greens. I think we've got a strong chance of doing that, but it's by no means certain. And that's why we need absolutely every possible vote across the whole state to get a sufficient Greens vote. Because if you look at the numbers, it may well come down to whether a Greens rep gets elected or whether United Australia Party or a One Nation Party gets elected for that last spot in the Senate. And I'm not going to wake up the day after the election and say, geez, I wish we'd got 2,000 more votes, because we kind of seem to have broken the parliament by putting One Nation in New South Wales. I don't want to do that.
So you're expecting that if you can get 1 out of every 10 people voting for you, then you will get your seat.
Yeah, that would be that would be a very, very comfortable position to be in at that 10% in the Senate.
And what can people do if they wish to help you in your goal? What can they personally do to help you get elected if people wish to do that?
Well, can I say some of the most powerful political messaging doesn't come from a politician? I mean, we're all engaged in this, right? We're super committed on climate. We care about it. We know the nuances of policy, and we want to bat it around like we're doing tonight, and we want to bat around politics. But for most people, the election is something that just kind of pops into their head. You know, in a few weeks out from the election, they might start thinking about it. And they're very resistant to hearing political messaging. But what people really value is one-to-one contact from their friends and people they trust. And so the more conversations you can have with your neighbours and your family and your workmates over the next 50-odd days, and remind them how important the climate is, remind them that, you know, this is like make or break election for us, and remind them about where the different parties stand on climate. You guys are actually, as it turns out, some of the most powerful advocates the climate has. More powerful in many ways than Greens politicians or Labor politicians or whatever. You guys are really powerful in that regard.
Excellent. You mentioned that you'd like to go to some questions from the audience. I can only see one so far. It's from Sam Outman. He's from Cadigal and Wongal country. And he says, what about charging the fossil fuel companies and their enablers? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, we do have a super profits tax on fossil fuels, on fossil fuel corporations. And we think we should actually make the buggers pay over the next 10 years as we rapidly wind down their operations. They should also pay for the transformation and be a big part of paying for the transformation. So yes, that is part of our tax policy and one that I really support. Excellent.
I think we've got 2 more questions left from our original list. And one of them is drawing on your experience from being a counsellor. And it's sorry, Sam's just asked for a clarification. We'll address that first. He said, what about criminal charges?
Well, Sam, one of the things I would love to do if we get in the Senate is actually have us collectively as a party say, well, actually, today is 15 July or whatever it is, the first day we're all there, and say, we just want to put everybody on notice that we're going to make ecocide a crime. It's going to be a crime. And anybody who's in a position of power and a policymaker who engages in the practice of ecocide, literally killing whole ecosystems, will be subject to criminal charges. And we're going to make it retrospective to today, the 14th of July. We just want to let you know. So you can all take that on board as you're going about your policy settings. I'm not really much for retrospective criminal provisions. But I think when you've got a bunch of people really willing to kill entire ecosystems and do it with their eyes open, we should put them on notice. And I'm all for making ecocide a serious criminal offence.
Excellent. Jackie, would you like me to go with the audience questions, or do you want me to continue with the questions?
Yeah, maybe I think we've got one or two extra questions of our own, but yeah, the audience questions are great, so we might as well go for those ones.
Excellent. Paul Judge has asked, how would the Greens engage with a majority Labor government?
Yeah, well, I mean, we would engage as constructively as we could with a majority Labor government, but see, a majority Labor government wouldn't feel a need to engage with us because they would be able to just rubber stamp through. It's basically a 3-year dictatorship where they just do whatever, that one-party rule does whatever they want over 3 years. I think we would still have a powerful advocacy voice, and I would still want to use a powerful advocacy voice. We do the community action, we do the political campaigning. You know, you can force change even on a majority government through really intelligent, hard campaigning from a minority position. And so, you know, it'll be 3 years of really hard struggle to try and get Labor to actually be more than slightly less shit than Scott Morrison. So that's how we would work. You would be doing the same kind of messaging, the same kind of work, the same kind of community action with an eye to putting pressure on them. We would have less tools to do it with, though, than if we were in the crossbench and we had a minority Labor government. If you want to know how we got ICAC, for example, in New South Wales, I mean, what majority government would ever deliver something with the powers of ICAC that has brought down Premier after Premier after Premier? None. No majority government would ever have done that. We got it through a minority government.
Well, yeah. For your best interests, I hope that you do get the minority Labor government that you're asking for. But I must say that I see you as a very persuasive person and a great speaker, David. And I'm sure either way, you will do a great job in your role. The next question is from Anna Bazzi, and she's from Anna Bazzi Backhouse from Darug country. And her question is, we have a new New South Wales planning minister who seems to be ditching planning principles. How do we address this? Principles directed at making Sydney more climate ready.
The guy's name is Anthony Roberts. You know that, Anna. And people should feel free if they want to just take the mic off and ask questions if that's going to work.
Yes, sorry about that. I should.
No, thank you, David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to add some context to that, Anna?
Well, I guess the context is my major concern is, you know, development applications and developers who are, you know, licensed to build, presumably, and, you know, the whole kind of urban heat map, urban cooling, creating more green spaces and so on. There are enshrined, as you know, principles within planning regulations about, you know, density, green space within even a very small block. And I'm hearing horrible things about all of this changing and for the worst.
So just for everybody's benefit, there are two things floating around at the moment that he's been an absolute scumbag on. The first was a planning order that had been issued by the previous planning minister, a guy called Rob Stokes, who is miles better when it comes to environmental outcomes than Anthony Roberts. Rob Stokes had issued a planning order and he'd given 3 months notice of it coming into effect, which required developers to take into account fire, flood and climate readiness in their development. And it was going to apply in a generic way across all development. It came into effect on the 1st of March. And between him issuing the order and it coming into effect, we got a new planning minister, Anthony Roberts. And within 14 days of that planning order coming into effect, Anthony Roberts killed it just by decision of him as a minister. He killed it within 14 days and he killed it just as the floodwaters were receding in Lismore. And, you know, notwithstanding the fact we'd also seen the terrible fire bombs of the black fires, he literally killed it within 14 days. I mean, the arrogance and the stupidity and the short-sightedness of what he did on that planning order, I think shocked people, genuinely shocked people, but he was cheered in by the Property Council and the Urban Developer Task Force, so he was probably happy. There's this other thing out at the moment called, I think it's the Design and Place, SEP. I may have got that strong, but there's a state environmental planning policy and a suite of changes to like a thing called basics and other planning issues, which say things like you would hope would just be utterly common sense. Instead of putting black tiled roofs on new subdivisions, they have to be light coloured so they reflect the heat and you don't get this huge heat sink. That there should be eaves, that our energy efficiency rates should be significantly, but not outrageously higher, but significantly higher. And that we should be ensuring that there are green corridors and the retention of as much mature vegetation as possible when we do new planning decisions, like things that just make so much bloody common sense. Now, they're out for exhibition at the moment and out for comment and in a draft form. And again, they were put out by the former planning minister. Anybody who cares about the future of our city supports that package of policies, right? I don't think it goes anywhere near enough. I think it's making an 11% saving on carbon emissions. I think we need to be talking 50 or 80% savings. But anyhow, it doesn't go far enough. But it's the first step forward we've seen in this space for decades. And Anthony, the fear is that the new planning minister, and he's more like a planning saboteur, to be honest, than a planning minister, the fear is he will kill that all off, and he'll kill it off in the next couple of weeks. So if you wanted to get your council to do something useful in this space, then getting them to write to the minister and make a public statement that they support the SEP and they would be offended by it being pulled in would actually be really useful right now.
I think that's something we could do. Do people, CBCAN members, do you think we should write to our mayor to ask him to do that publicly?
Absolutely, yeah.
If you say yes, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a hand on that. I mean, the other thing, if you don't mind me saying, David, sorry, just very quickly on that note, because I'm in and out of conversations with developers and all kinds of people who are building and constructing. You know, they'll do anything to get a DA over the line, and then 6 months later you'll go back and all the grass has been ripped out and, you know, concrete has been put down. I think we just need something better than this private certifier scenario, as you know, to try and keep these guys from, when they're putting these developments together, that they don't go back and rip stuff out.
Yeah, look, I mean, we should just end private certification. The idea you pay for your own police, you choose and pay for your own police in the development industry is, I mean, I'd love to do that for the road. You know, I could choose my speeding police for my trip to Newcastle. There'd be a small moral hazard in that, though, I think. But yeah, it happens in development all the time. So yeah, don't get me started on planning. We will not end this meeting.
Oh yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Excellent. Our next question was from Paul. If you'd like to unmute, Paul, and ask your question.
Not sure how my microphone is working. Is that?
That's clear. Thank you.
So my question was, with an eye to the outcome of the recent case in the federal court about Susan Lay and her duty of care towards our young people on future planning decisions or development approvals. What scope do you see, David, for some sort of legislative action that would basically remove the discretion from the minister of the day and basically impose that duty of care?
Well, it won't surprise you, Paul, that I think, of course, decision makers in critical decision portfolios like the environment portfolio, it should have a duty of care over future generations, and not just future generations of humans, but like future generations of all living things on the planet. Of course, there should be that duty of care. And the fact that the law currently doesn't see one and doesn't impose one goes to show how cooked our economic system is. Like, we think we can actually divorce duty of care over people to duty of care over the environment and don't see a linkage between the two. I don't know if people have realised it's very hard for the law to go beyond basic property principles from like the 17th, 18th and 19th century, and they're not good at understanding those broader social imperatives, the common law. I say this as a recovering barrister. So I think it was a great initiative. I'm glad the students did it. I hope they're looking to see whether or not special leave is available to the High Court. That's a hard path to row, but I hope they're doing that, and I think they are. But, and if they get it and they get the duty of care, well, then terrific. I think that would be great. But we shouldn't wait for the common law to come and fix this. We should actively legislate it into practice. And more than just a kind of a generic amorphous duty of care, we should expressly say what that means in terms of protecting ecosystems.
Happy with that answer. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Naomi, would you like to ask your question?
So mine is about the new proposed they're like regional agreements or regional plans. There's 10 of them. They seem to be about speeding up the planning process in general. How do the Greens feel about these plans, and would they move to repeal them?
Yeah, well, I'm not the planning spokesperson for the party in New South Wales anymore, so I haven't read in detail all of the regional plans, but I am aware of the general criticism of them, that they are overly economically driven, that they haven't got good flood mapping and environmental mapping underpinning them, and they don't put in place the values that we need in terms of protecting people from fire and flood-prone development, and also protecting ecosystems. And they've come out of the New South Wales Planning Department, so they're pretty much focused on encouraging further housing supply, as though somehow pumping out more housing units into a broken housing market is going to make housing more affordable. It won't. But that's the myth that they're generated under. We think one of the problems is that they're very arbitrary, the regions that they're doing. Often when you talk to people, planners who come at their work, particularly in regional planning, they come at it from a environmental perspective. They actually talk about planning in catchments and how we should be actually planning for catchments, which is a really natural kind of regional structure to do a lot of your planning around. And traditionally there have been some regional plans that are focused on catchments. So I think we are quite critical of that where they're driving. They're driving housing supply and putting environmental and social issues on the back burner to drive housing supply. I think they're largely designed to do that. They're not designed to really help the environment. And probably that whole structure needs to be rethought, and we should be thinking about like coastal planning and then catchment planning, and looking at those kind of natural systems as the basis for our regional planning.
Excellent. Guys, if you have a question, please put it in now so we can try to fit them in. We've only got about 5 to 10 minutes left. So please quickly, if you do have any last questions, go for it.
Alex, I have to leave at 7:25. Oh. No, at 7:25. I've got to go. Our parties have sort of Q&A on treaty.
Yes.
And
Sorry.
we off at 7:30. That's okay. If you give me 5 minutes, that's okay. That's all I need between.
We might hold it to these 2 questions. If you got one that's really burning, please write it quickly and we'll try to fit it in. Brian, quickly, you got your development question, your local development question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex, and thanks very much, Mr. Senator, to spend your time with us.
David's okay.
Okay, sorry about that, mate. Old age. We've got a big problem here. We've got 35 hectares. Developers are licking their lips. They can just see multi-storey buildings. We've got Cooks River alongside it, which is in badly need of being cleaned up.
You're talking about the racecourse?
The racecourse, yes. They keep saying they don't want to sell it. They want lights at Randwick, so they're going to close it down. We've been told there's already plans getting drawn up. Is there anything the Greens can do to assist or to a course of action or whatever in relation to it? We're hoping to having a meeting with you, but you're going to be very busy the next week.
After the 21st of May, I may have a lot of time on my hands, and I can come back if I don't get elected, and I'll come back and talk with you about a grassroots campaign on this. But either way, even elected or not, I think it's critical to build a mass local movement on that. And we're talking thousands of locals on board about protecting the racecourse and not seeing it turn into apartments, and pointing out just what an unfair amount of intense development Canterbury-Bankstown has taken over the last 2 decades, and how it's absolutely critical that this be a kind of return, something back for the community and something back for nature, given what you guys have been confronted with over the last 2 decades. Look, can I give you an idea? And it's just come into me as we're having this discussion. Late last week, we, after a sort of real arm wrestle with the government and with Labor, I might add, we passed a new piece of legislation called the Greater Sydney Parkland Act. And that puts in place a new Greater Sydney Parkland Authority. and through a bunch of amendments we put together, also means that for a lot of the existing parks, and we're talking, say, Parramatta Park, Western Sydney Parklands, Callan Park, Moore Park, Centennial Park, they're the ones that are currently in this Greater Sydney Parklands thing. There's a centralised authority whose job is to help maintain those parks and expand the park estate. And we've got local management committees for those parks, which have local reps on it, who have a key role in managing those individual parks. I would be thinking about running a campaign that says we want the racecourse brought into the Greater Sydney Parkland Authority, controlled by the Greater Sydney Parkland Authority, as a critical part of the expanded green open space and the footprint of the Greater Sydney Parkland Authority. And you can put it in the context of that legislation that just passed the upper house. As I said last Thursday, I think it's going to go through, be rubber stamped tomorrow in the lower house.
Excellent.
If you want some more details about that and how it might all fit together, I'm more than happy to come back and talk to you again at some point.
Yes, really appreciate that.
Linda normally mines me for information in this space as well, but I think that would actually be a really, strong local campaign. It's topical. You've got a structure you can aim for, and you've got an outcome. You've got a really, really serious outcome you can aim for.
In a similar vein,
guys, please reach out to Brian if you're willing to assist in that campaign too. He's been working hard, and I'm sure you'll appreciate all the help he
Yes,
get.
David, we've got a Canterbury Racecourse Action Group. We've got a Facebook page, website.
Excellent.
We have done a lot of work. Unfortunately, politicians aren't talking to us at the moment.
Excellent. We'll have people in here who can definitely help. With 1 minute left, Sheila, you've got your question. Go ahead.
Hi, my question is, David, thanks a lot for your presentation. Do you see a carbon tax coming back, and would it be part of your agenda?
Well, we don't have an immediate plan for a carbon tax. We've got those other far more direct measures that we want to put in place at the moment, which is keeping coal and gas in the ground. That's a far more direct way of addressing climate change and rapidly expanding our renewable energy output. So as actually we start exporting and we become an actually globally significant exporter of renewable energy. They're the principal policy levers we see in the short to medium term to really radically reduce our climate emissions, our carbon emissions. Also, Labor has made it clear that would never be willing to talk about a carbon tax as part of their policy package. So it's not on the short-term horizon. It's also very much a sort of secondary measure in how we address carbon emissions. We think those direct measures are probably where we should be looking at right now if we want to get to net zero by 2035. But we don't exclude it, as it may well be, once we do that really big, hard-hitting, those initial big, hard-hitting policies, it may well be part of how we get to get into that net zero by 2035. Some really stubbornly resistant parts of the economy may actually require a carbon tax, Sheila. So, the door isn't shut to it, but it's just we have such a degree of urgent action we need in those other spaces at the front. That's where we're focusing all our attention.
Excellent.
Yeah,
And in one sentence to finish up, it says, why should people vote for you? But I'm going to switch it to why should people campaign for you? Why should people help to push you into your seat, David?
Well, I mean, we may disagree on little bits and pieces in terms of the exact pathway to get to net zero. We may have slightly different nuances in where we want to go to in sort of, tax policy or this. But we have this enormous challenge in front of us, which is literally critical to our society continuing, to our ecosystem surviving, to, nature surviving. And if we're all on the same page of that, we need as many people who care about that stuff and prioritise it in Parliament as possible. Now, maybe you've got better options and better people that you can put in who care about this stuff more than I do and have a plan better than mine and the Greens, in which case put them in. But I actually think the bulk of people running in this upcoming election are going to continue to mortgage our future. And we need as many possible progressive politicians in that place, in the federal parliament, to turn this thing around. That motivates me to get up and do the work I do. I hope it motivates you to get up and get out the vote for Greens or progressive independents or whoever you think will do that job best, because it's urgent and we can't do it without you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David, for joining us tonight. Good luck in your upcoming election. Let's all give David an excellent round of applause. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everybody. Nice
And-
facilitating too, Alex. Very, tough. That's what I like.
Thank you.
And just stay on, everybody else. Just stay on. We can have a quick chat. See you,
Okay,
David.
see you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Bye.
Bye.